Justin A.W. Blair here. I'm a writer. I'm a painter. I am a fly by the seat of his pants expositor on fantasy, science fiction, genre writing as a pastime. Tonight, many of you will notice that I'm not wearing some raggedy t shirt, but instead a flannel shirt. And I just want to, before we begin this review this evening, explain to you why I have adopted the flannel shirt this evening. And that is because tonight we are going to be reviewing Bookshops and Bonedust by Travis Baldree. I just think we need to get this out right from the beginning. This is a book about a lesbian orc. And tonight, that's why I've decided, in a show of solidarity with the small, but I'm sure vocal lesbian audience for the Justin A.W. Blair YouTube channel, that I've decided to don a flannel shirt, which is, from my understanding, a material which that community enjoys. My cat bit my face also, and I feel kind of tired, a little bit low energy. And I feel like that's kind of a lesbian lifestyle, you know? So again, olive branch, starting out the video right. Found this book in a box of free books. Don't worry yourself about the details. Looked at the cover. I'm going to put the cover up here on the screen for you guys to examine as we speak about do a little overview, the cover art, the author, the background, the why of the why of why I am reviewing this book, because some will notice from the content of my channel this would not be this wouldn't fall into the usual type of book that I would read or review. The simple answer is I found it in a box of books and it was free. I didn't buy it. I looked at the cover and I said to myself, I'd like to see what this is about, a change of sorts. And I looked at it and I was like, okay, I get a vibe which I am not accustomed to from this cover. But I'm a brave man, a man of courage. I'm going to open it and I'm going to expose myself to this modern fantasy, because I could tell it was a cozy fantasy. And I've heard this term floating around. I thought to myself, I'd like to know what this is all about. There is an extraordinarily muscular female orc eating probably a scone, some sort of baked good on the cover, which is not something that would really appeal to me visually. But I said to myself, no, the year is 2026. And as a man of courage, I need to step outside of the usual types of books I read, see what this is all about. I've heard criticisms of this and that and the other thing, but I want to know for myself. I want to actually read a book which is different than what I would normally read and see what it's all about. Okay, so I don't like long commercials in the middle of a YouTube video, so I'll get to the point quick. My own novel written by me, Justin A.W. Blair, entitled The Haunt on the Island of Esmer, is out, available on Amazon. You can buy it in ebook or paperback format. It is inspired by Malazan, A Song of Ice and Fire, and The Black Company. Epic novels in that vein. Take a moment, check it out. It didn't take long for me to assume. I made an assumption, and it was apparently a faulty assumption. I thought this book has to be written by a lesbian. I went back and I front of the cover and I said, well, Travis. Well, maybe not, but probably a gay dude, right? Because this book is it doesn't come out straight and hit you over the head with it, but you get some signals fairly early on. You get a sense of what's gonna happen here. I'm like, okay, so let's read on, not worry about that. Then, as I often do, about halfway through, I was like, let's look up Mr. Baldree, see what's up. Apparently just a guy with a wife and a family and living in somewhere in the Northwest, which I feel like Oregon or what's it, Oregon, and what's the other state? Washington. Kind of lesbian coded states. Dispute me in the comments if you like. What is cozy fantasy? Well, now I can tell you. But I figured this out because I'm a man of genius without even looking up the Wikipedia article for cozy fantasy. I could get the idea just from reading the first few chapters. Low stakes. All right, actually, let me do this right. I don't want to. This is a. Let me stop for a second. Also, say this is a very COVID novel, and in solidarity with that, I do not want to accidentally dispense misinformation on the internet because my understanding is that almost became illegal during the COVID strife. What is cozy fantasy? Let's go to Wikipedia, fairly lesbian coded website. Cozy fantasy is a subgenre of fantasy fiction, indeed, characterized by its focus on comforting, low stakes narratives set in fantasy worlds. It emphasizes themes of community, friendship, healing, and everyday life, often eschewing violence, war, and other serious conflict typical of high fantasy. Emphasizes hope, kindness, empathy, and community. There's that word community again. Relationships, including family, found family, friendship, and healthy romance, are central, and many cozy fantasies have queer protagonists. Okay. This book fits that exactly. In fact, my understanding, with a little bit of research, is that this is the prequel to a book called something in lattes. Was it Legends and Lattes? This is actually the prequel to that, which was a successful book. And this came out in 2023. I'm not sure if the other one came out in 2022. It was during that COVID era. I am always careful when I hear such words as community, but let's soldier on through here and take a look. What are my impressions of this book? This isn't going to be, I'd like to say right off the bat, this isn't going to be a video where I rant and rave and rail against this book. Why? Partially because I'm feeling low energy. Partially also because I tire of that content. It we're right now in a moment, a couple of days before Starfleet Academy debuts. And the internet, my algorithm, which is so twisted and odd, is filled with people ranting and raving and railing about how Starfleet Academy is going to be terrible. And I agree. It looks like it's going to be an absolute terrible addition to the franchise. And that hurts my heart because I like Starflack. I like Star Trek. If you check my channel out, you'll see it's loaded to the brim with Star Trek content. But my point is, you don't really need to watch a video of a man yelling about how he hates something. There's billions of videos out there on every subject conceivable. This is a man who is not a lesbian, despite my flannel shirt, despite my injury by a house cat. I am not. This is a video about a non-lesbian reading a book about a lesbian orc. Now, are there pitfalls involved in that? There sure are. But I want to get down to what this book is really about, and I want to say some good things about it. I really try my hardest. I try to find, if I'm going to spend the time to read an entire book, and I did, I try to find some good things about it. I wasn't hate reading this. I wasn't. I thought I might. Towards the beginning ish, I thought I might just hate read this in a rage and then rage out on a video. But no, I didn't hate read it because I didn't actually hate the book. I can see the attraction of the cozy fantasy genre in the sense that putting fantasy characters, in fantasy setups and fantasy plots, but in a low stakes type of way, I can see the potential appeal of that. Now, this specific instance didn't particularly appeal to me. Why? Because one of my criticisms of it is that this is the most generic World of Warcraft ass role playing server, Reddit 2014, 2012, the 2010s type fantasy world you are ever going to find. Truly. Truly is. We have orcs, we have elves, we have another thing which again feels very COVID-y and it spooks me a little bit. We got kind of animal people, furry adjacent type people. I'm not, this isn't the time to get into the furry question. It's not. I don't know enough about it to speak to you about it in plain English. But there are ratkins, that kin word on the end of it. There's something there. Something there. But, that is to some degree something that you find in World of Warcraft and that kind of thing. Human animal hybrids. There is and I'd like to say a good thing about this. There are a couple of characters I actually like. There is a skeleton, we'll just call him a skeleton, that is kind of a good skeleton, a miniature good skeleton named Satchel. Well drawn character, kind of original, kind of interesting. The whole thing surrounding the character is done really well. It was enjoyable. I liked the character. I like the little griffin dog type animal that the bookseller in this book had. But whoa, 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 Justin, you say. I've never read Bookshops and Bonedust. You're way ahead of me. What? A ratkin and a lesbian orc in a bookstore? What's going on? I'm not going to try to spoil this book for you. It's not necessary. So I'm not going to. I am going to give you a little bit of what the setup is. The setup is burly orc woman who's a young warrior in the pay of some mercenaries is injured while she's hacking through some skeletons. In this mercenary company she's a part of, she gets injured, and the dwarf or whatever who leads it sends her off to a seaside town to recover while they continue their pursuit of a necromancer villain. So all of this book pretty much takes place in a small seaside town and the countryside immediately around it. But primarily, it all takes place in a bookstore. Why a bookstore? Well, the orc is bored and she walks down to the beach and she walks into the bookstore, befriends this rat bookseller, and then the the gnome the gnome oh god, okay, how should I put this? I mean, this book is really boring in a lot of ways. And yet, again, somehow it manages to not be boring. Let's have a drink of tea, think this through a bit. Continuing on with the synopsis, but without plot spoilers. Lesbian orc who's injured is healing up in the small seaside town, meets a failing bookshop owner, befriends her, and then befriends in a more intimate way the female gnome baker who is next door on the cozy seaside fantasy town of whatever. I've already forgotten the name of it. Doesn't matter. Again, and this is what I want to reiterate through this, the fantasy setting itself is the most generic fantasy setting you can think of. That is a criticism I have of this. I assume it was done on purpose to lure readers into this subgenre. Maybe not. My understanding is the author was a video game designer, and I'm not sure if the video games he designed or whatever he worked on was role-playing game exactly, but This guy's obviously like some kind of Reddit nerd guy. He's into role playing games. And hey, again, I've said it before. I've admitted on this channel before. I have told you before. I have not played any tabletop role playing games. I'm not against them. It is a very generic world, though. It really does feel like. And I look. I'm admitting all kinds of things this evening. I'm really bearing my soul to the audience, you know. And I played World of Warcraft for a few years, pretty intensely. Now, some of you will understand what I'm about to say, and some will not. And this is going to encapsulate the overall tone of this. In World of Warcraft, back in the day, I'm not sure what it's like now, there are servers. There are different types of servers. There are PvP servers, which is where I roll because I like that challenging aspect of it. And there are PvE servers. PvE basically means that other characters aren't going to be able to attack you. PvP, come on, you're listening to a fantasy YouTube channel. You know what this means. There are also role RP and then RP, PvE, RP, PvP. RP meant role playing. So this meant that as you're playing the game, you're supposed to adopt a character, their persona, and actually while you're communicating with other people in the server, you're supposed to adopt that persona, make it your own little mythology about it, and stick with that. This feels like the author stayed way too long in a WoW role playing server. That's what it feels like. Again, we're on our seaside town. A romance ensues, and we should also say here this is not in any way smut. It's not a pornographic book. It's not a particularly sexual book at all. There is not a single uh, sexually gratuitous scene at all in the book. In fact, none of that exists whatsoever. This is PG or G in terms of the actual um, way that things are shown. We'll go with PG just because there's some jokes and this and that and all that. And they're bad jokes. They're very Reddit jokes. This is again, I'm trying to explain to you something which many of you may not have any understanding of. And I've sat here drinking my tea, thinking about this on the porch, smoking my cigarette, thinking, how can I explain this book? It is as if you took a role-playing server from WoW and smashed it together with Reddit, and then but this all happened during COVID, and a goodly tonally it is, let's use the word which is very outdated almost in the year 2026. It is woke. Every character, pretty much. There's like one very minor side character. Pretty much every character is a female. Pretty much every one of the female main characters are what we sometimes call on the internet girl bosses. The one character that may not be like that exactly is the bookshop seller, who is a decent character, actually. The character, not bad. However, and this is another big thing about this book, this is a big turnoff for me. The dialogue, the tone, we talk about register a lot on this channel. How do you hit the right register for dialogue in a fantasy world? This is absurdly Reddit inspired. There is a character who literally says fuck yeah a few times, I think, in the book. At least once. I noted it. It's taxing. I'm tired, boss. I don't know what that means, but I think it's a Reddit thing. It's taxing. It is also extremely easy to read, though. And that's true not just of the dialogue, but of the description. And again, the description is not epic and it's not good. But remember, this is cozy fantasy. So it's not particularly supposed to be that way. However, it does feel like, again, I mean, some of the descriptions of this really feels like a guy was just looking at a small town in World of Warcraft. And I was playing mainly in the Pandaria, whatever, I forget now. Legends of Pandaria days for the most part. But The description of this, the setting, really feels like I feel like I could go track it down and find it. There were some towns that were on the coast somewhere in World of Warcraft. Put it in the comments if you know what I'm talking about. Feels a little bit like that, though not exactly, because I remember that tended to be more tropical. This feels more like, I don't know, man, France or something. And that's another aspect of this book that I wanted to talk about. When I say it's a COVID book, first, it's a very retiring book. It's kind of low energy. There is a threat from the outside that is potentially coming in. But also, what also makes it a COVID book, and I've just had to think through this. I mean, there are times where I literally feel like they're going to introduce a Dr. Fauci gnome character that comes in and vaccinates everybody against evil. That doesn't happen. That didn't happen, but I felt like it was going to happen. What I really mean by this is that there's a certain class of people, middle class, upper middle class people during COVID who had enough money to run away to small beach towns and just wait it out there. There are other people, such as myself, who did not avail himself of such options. Some of you, maybe in the audience, know what I'm talking about. Some of you in my audience might be essential workers. I knew some people, very few, but I knew a few people who had the means and the ability to flee. It's a totally different experience of the pandemic. And I feel like this is a book written for not just lesbians. It is written for an audience that has the soul of a lesbian. And many of those people retired and stayed on second home beachfront properties during COVID and got on the internet and bitched to everybody else because they didn't have anything else to do. That's what it feels like a little bit. There's that feel to it. And if that's all cozy fantasy is, and I say no, I don't want to be a part of it. I don't want to. Beyond the fact that I don't want to be a part of it, I'm going to say a few more good things about this before I tell you I'm never going to read a book by this author again. Stay tuned. On the Reddit note, we have many, many references to bacon. We have phrases which I'm pretty sure are associated with the Reddit community. We have a kind of nihilism, and again, a kind of low energy nihilism, like just let everybody do what they want, man. Everything's cool. Nothing even matters. There's a little bit of that, though I see that primarily in the strange emphasis on baked goods. What are you talking about, Justin? Are you a madman? Maybe. You wouldn't believe me, and you will never believe me because you'll probably never read this book. You wouldn't believe how many passages, how many chapters are just descriptions of people eating and going, it's there's something about this obsession with baked goods and just lounging about and eating baked goods in little cafes and stuff. Look, this is not a book for me, but that's why I read it, because I want to expand my horizons and understand where people are coming from. That being said, perhaps it's time just to read you a passage of this book so you'll get a sense of the tone now. And what's in here? Fern's the ratkin that has a foul mouth, cursing all the time. And what's in here? Fern fingered the twine binding the package. Maylee said she tried something from the Gnomish cookbook. That's all I know. Open it. Fern needed no further prompting and untied the neat bow. Unfolding the paper, she revealed several flaky pastries, scored across their tops, oozing preserved fruit. She picked one up and took a bite. Eight hells, she breathed. If you were sweet on Maylee for nothing but the food, I'd hardly blame you. Everybody's got an opinion on that, don't they? Grumbled Viv, coloring slightly. Viv is the lesbian orc from the cover. Kiss who you want. You're grown ups. I'm just grateful for the side benefits. She patted the books with a paw. You're done with these? Fern withdrew a book from under the counter and set it next to Viv's pile. I've been meaning to spring this on you, and I think you're ready. Viv ran a thumb over a rich green cloth bound cover. The lens and the dapplegram. It's a mystery. You mean you don't know what it's about? I haven't done the voices. I'm not going to do that. I don't know what a lesbian orc sounds like. No, it's a genre. The book is about a mystery and how it gets solved. And they need this many pages to do that? Fern laughed. Well, it's also about the investigator, and he's one of my favorites. You might relate. He's this grizzled old mercenary who lost a leg, and he's got this clever companion who's a chemist. I should relate to grizzled and old, huh? Viv pretended to be affronted. The ratkin stuck out her tongue and slapped Viv on the arm. Have I steered you wrong yet? And if you like it, well, there's more where that came from. She took another huge bite of the pastry and closed her eyes in a dreamy pleasure as she chewed, then swallowed. Fuck, she said appreciatively. Chapters and chapters of this. At one point, a bunch of women go out thrifting and eating at a fine restaurant in town, and then they go to a tavern and get drunk and become boisterous and loud. That's an entire chapter. Again, this is just not a book for me. This is a book for some people. There is no doubt about that. In fact, I think this is a very successful book and fast-selling book, is my understanding. I think this cozy fantasy subgenre with some changes. This is a very new thing. Before I started, I looked it up a little bit. I've read from the Wikipedia for you, but the citations for source, please. The citations for the cozy fantasy thing seem primarily to be two French sources. Emmanuel Lascoué de la cozy fantasy au hop punk vers un ralentissement des littératures de l'imaginaire. You like that? From the Centre de Recherche Interuniversitaire en Sociocritique des Textes in French, September 26, 2025. And also sur TikTok, les romans cosy devenant un genre littéraire à part entière from La Dépêche, which is Depeche Mode's paper in French. Anyway, this thing called Book Riot. That sounds fucking. I mean, what counts as cozy fantasy? Other stuff. It kind of seems like an invented thing. There's a part that says that The Hobbit is cozy fantasy. That's nonsense. That's total nonsense. There's a gigantic adventure. Guy actually has to leave his home and the coziness of his home and deal with the consequences of an adventure, which is dangerous. Not all like this. The online community Book Talk helped establish and popularize the category. So it's just some weird MK Ultra, new K Ultra is what I like to call it, internet mind control phenomenon, which is what I assume Book Talk is. Don't know. I don't think I'm part of the Book Talk community. I don't think I'm part of the BookTube community, as far as I know. I don't think I'm part of the community. So, what else I had to say about this? Look, I'm going to say, well, first I'm going to make sure I've said everything that I want negative about it. Okay, there's a couple small things. First off, the places where the violence exists, they do something clever, but also kind of cheap, which is the mighty warrior orc lesbian. The main thing you see her doing at the very beginning of the battle is using a sword against skeletons. No one cares about that, right? Like, you can go hack and slash skeletons, animated skeletons, and nobody feels the force of that violence, or there's no blood even, right? There's no stakes to it. Again, fair enough. That's what this is. But there's an avoidance there. There's something that it doesn't quite set right with me. However, again, it's the subgenre, which is kind of fake, but that's what it is. I noticed a little thing. I'm a man who notices little things, little details, and I extrapolate from there. Sometimes it leads me down the wrong path, and sometimes not. About a third of the way in is where you get to the point where it is explicit that the main character is a lesbian. Yes, there are hints before that for sure. In fact, they're fairly explicit hints, but it's really at that point where it's very much put out there. She comes out as a lesbian to the other lesbian, Gnome Baker. This is not a problem for anybody in the community, of course. There's not any mention there would be any problem. In fact, everyone just gets along perfectly. All the different races of the orcs and the elves, there's no clashing. They're all just folks hanging out. The sexuality thing is not presented as a problem, a conflict. Again, fair enough. Maybe that is part of the cozy thing, just to not have any of those clashes, which we might see in a fantasy or in terms of the sexuality, see in a fantasy, especially because so much of it is rooted in medieval European values, which would not look brightly upon such behavior. But all that can be understood as just this cozy subgenre of fantasy. But there is something, the little detail I noticed. The little detail I noticed, this is a used book. And people, I always find it interesting when I'm reading, looking through used books. It's all I read. Where previous readers have left a bookmark. Because where they have left the bookmark is usually when they have discarded the book. And it was at that exact place where the lesbian relationship becomes explicit that I found the bookmark from the previous reader, who then obviously had either donated it or whatever, got rid of the book. I always find that, it's the height of anecdotal evidence, but I do find that interesting to see where people leave bookmarks in used books. I'm a hyper modern man, so I pressed on. How to wrap this up? I want to say I read this through, I think 4 or 5 days, 4 or 5 nights, or whatever. It didn't pull me towards it, but it is extraordinarily well edited. Structurally, it's pretty much perfect in terms of how to keep a reader moving through. It's a professional job. This is not a novice effort. I suppose it's this author's second book. But while I don't particularly like the tone, and I wouldn't go back to something with that exact tone, I don't particularly like the world building, which is very generic. It is a consistent tone, and it does push a reader through quickly. I found myself like, okay, what scone is she going to eat next? I'm going to admit it. I'm going to admit it straight up to you. There is something so mundane about much of it that it was fittingly kind of a cozy fantasy. It works on that level in a weird way. Like so many books, which I kind of start out hating when I sit down to record. And there are a lot of things I don't like about this book. And again, I'm never going to read this again, this author or this subgenre. I ultimately found it kind of vacant, a bit vacuous, but there were some. I think if you had read the first book, the way this ends didn't really pull any punches on the kind of, yes, it's kind of sentimental romance angle. And I don't want to give away to you what happens at the end in case someone does want to read it. I don't think that's good to do. But the ending was decent. Everything's tied together. It's just all tied together a little too neatly. There's something that feels a little bit false about it. But maybe it's just extraordinarily slick. Or, as some of the characters refer to the romance books, moist. And they're baked goods. They refer to that also. I think this book is for urban female librarians. Why do I say that? I say that also because there is a kind of theme of this bookseller who really does seem to care about books, and she talks the same shit you hear librarians say they believe in, and you know what, some of them probably do. But it's this kind of idea of like, I really enjoy my life here at the bookstore is about giving the right book to the right person at the right time. That's what makes it all worthwhile, even though I don't make any money. I guess I'm sitting here for a long period of time talking to a microphone, you know, about books. So I'm not going to completely be mad at that. Feels a little bit, it all just feels a little bit like maybe Travis Baldry is a pseudonym for Anthony Fauci. Jacques Hughes. No, I don't know. Anyway, look, there's quite a bit to say about this one. Not terrible. I am going to get in my what do lesbians drive? Jeeps. I'm gonna get into my Jeep, drive down to the beach at night and stare at the waves and eat a scone from my favorite independent bookseller, Banned Books. They have a shelf in there, Banned Books. Buy a scone, my Kindle e-reader out, just look at the waves, stare at the ocean, you know. I get back in my Jeep. I don't know. Low energy. That's all for this video. Justin A.W. Blair. You know me. Like, subscribe. Again, I just hope that my lesbian audience really enjoys the enthusiasm and the time that I spent with this video, which I think is significant. So, thanks very much. I'm going to record some other stuff now. I will see you next time.